All right, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today, I have retired Chief Alexander III. He has 32 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to this. So welcome to the show, Retired Chief Alexander III. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Paige, for having me here with you, and I'm very excited about this segment of your podcast.
Of course, I'm looking forward to it as well. 32 years is a long time to be in law enforcement, and so I'm looking forward to sharing some of your insights. Can you give us a little bit of background? Who are you? And, maybe give us a little bit of insight into what your career looked like.
I'm actually was born and raised right here in Pensacola, Florida, and I went off to college in Atlanta and came back to Pensacola and got involved in law enforcement from an entry-level position. I really didn't know anything about law enforcement. All I knew is that it was just in me to want to be a public safety officer, police officer. It was something from childhood that I was drawn to, but a lot of times throughout your life, you're encouraged to pursue other careers that may be more popular or more financially beneficial to be involved in. But at the end of the day, I went back to what I had a passion for, is that's protecting people.
Mm.
So I went in as entry level position. I worked my way up to as a trainer. I was a training officer. I became a supervisor. I had some split time in law enforcement because sometimes the stress and pressures comes on to be an entry level police officer. You're working more. You seem to have less time with your family. And so I left law enforcement. I was actually kind of lured away with better pay. And that when I went and studied human resource management as part of my career development, I realized that pay was not necessarily the number one motivator. It was job satisfaction. You got to like what you're doing. So I transitioned and went about 2 years into a private detective role, working for a public defender's office at our court system, our local court system. And I found out my passion was about being in law enforcement and doing that service that people desperately want and desire and certainly need. So I went back, and about 18 months later, I was promoted supervisor. And following that, my career just kind of took a accelerated pathway, and I wound up working my way up to police chief. And so, during the course of those 32 years, of course, my body took on tremendous amounts of stress at various levels. I watched colleagues, I watched people retiring and how long they live after retirement. I mean, one guy retired at after about 30 some odd years, and he didn't get his first retirement check before he passed away. So the healthiness became a very big concern of mine. And of course, as I got along in my career, you found out it was not necessarily the high priorities. So as chief of police, I submitted my 5 year plan. And one of the things I thought was very important in the 5 year plan was to include not just a community centered policing plan, but also there has to be an officer wellness part. And we were not able to really implement that full plan, but I did plant some seeds before I left. And that's where leading by example, taking that proactive role to champion those causes. And there are folks coming up through the ranks that listen, and it becomes internalized to a greater extent. I'm just happy today that there's more focus inside the profession about wellness than there was when I was there. And my only regret is that I had started to push that issue at a lower rank than I did when I got to the top. Sometimes, one of my mentors says, remember the things you can't change where you are. And then when you move to the top, those things that you can change, you change it. So when
Mm.
I got to the top, I felt it was important from the top that officer wellness was one of my priorities in my 5 year community policing strategy. It's just that you're not going to always get the traction from those, even your bosses that may come from city government. It may not be supported to the extent that it can be pushed through, and the benefits such as retention and recruitment uh, becomes realized So even today, we're having to rethink law enforcement. We're trying to get union representatives right now on a workforce development board so that the recruitment, retention, and also the work performance of officers is considered even when you're advertising and promoting the profession as a place that officers, young officers, men and women will want to consider as a career. So you have to have people at the table early on that can contribute to that conversation and make sure everything that needs to be considered can be considered. So I look back and I just wish that there were more opportunities for what we have now. But what I can do from where I am now is to champion this conversation, try to get in positions to make it more of a reality, make it happen rather than just talk about it. I don't mind having conversations about things, but I like to see things done. So I like to be an action Jackson. I want to get it done, and that way you can create opportunities for future generations to do better and also to live better. I've been retired now for uh, coming up on 8 years, and I'm doing better, but it didn't come without some challenges. So I've had some health challenges since I retired, and certainly I've watched other colleagues that have retired even before and after me have health challenges, such as hip replacements. So, you have to consider a lot of things that traditionally uh, they haven't considered in law enforcement. But officer safety, officer wellness is a public health issue
Yeah.
because if officers are not healthy, then they're not at the best they can be when they serve the community, when they serve and protect the community. So it's really about protecting the protectors
Mm.
when we talk about officer wellness. So that's why I'm really delighted to be on this podcast with you today.
Thank you. And there's really a few things I want to kind of dissect in what you just said. You got me
Okay.
really excited on a few different topics. One of them is there's so much value in learning from people who came before you and learning from the people around you. So I think there's two things that we need to do to encourage growth. One is looking around. So you said this, as you were, kind of looking around, you saw people in your profession who were retiring and they weren't having a long life. You were
Right.
seeing this happen. You were seeing this challenge and this issue. And then it's like, how can we then look inside of ourselves and determine what are the steps that we need to take in order to make a positive, healthy change for ourselves, right? So I think that it's a two-step process of one, how can we zoom out and look around and say, who do I want to emulate? Who do I not want to be like, or what result do I not want? What result do I want? And then turning that view inward and saying, okay, now it's my responsibility to take action and to take
Right.
those steps to be able to walk the path that you want to walk, right? And I think we've all been faced with that. You know, I've had friends and family, and I look around and there's definitely times where I'm like, man, I don't want that outcome for myself.
Right.
And so then when you have that awareness of, okay, I don't want that outcome for myself, I want something better or different, what do we have to do to get there? What are those steps that we need to take to, make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success? Um, the other thing that you talked about that I thought was really interesting is you said Action Jackson. I've never heard this before, it made me laugh because I think it's so important that we have conversations about things. I think it's so important to have awareness and education around things, but even more importantly, we have to take action. We can sit around, the fire pit all night long talking about all the things that we want to accomplish, but what's the point if we don't actually do the things? So I really appreciated that, like, hey, like, yeah, we can talk about it. It's important to talk about it, but what is the actionary step? What are those things that we can do to encourage positive change? Um, I wanted to kind of talk about the statement that you said about I wish. I started this podcast because of conversations like this. I would have conversations with leadership And I was always hearing these I wish statements.
Yes.
I wish I would have known. I wish that these things were, presented earlier. I wish I would have been more proactive. I wish, I wish, I wish. And I think that no matter what, everyone is going to, grow up and have a few of
Yeah.
those, I wish statements, a few regrets. What are some of those regrets or some of those lessons learned that you had throughout your career that you wish that maybe you would have known earlier, or you wish that you would have prioritized earlier in your career?
Well, I believe that early on in my career, when I started to see these things, for instance, I was just a rookie officer when the sergeant retired, and he never got his first paycheck before he had a massive heart attack and died. And so it's like, man, that's tragic. I said, I don't want that to happen to me. But
Hmm.
it should have gone further. And when I say I wish I had turned to my colleagues. And we did. We talked about it, and it was a horrible, horrible thing. And so that was a trigger. So I mean, you say, man, you can live to retire and then die before you get your first check. So it creates a little bit of a paranoia. But what we should have done is to have a more constructive conversation, such as, okay, what did he not do that he should have done? Well, exercising. I mean, a guy used to be a wrestler, so he had insight, but as he got older, he didn't use the insight to keep him viable and young. I mean, the guy used to box, he was a wrestler, he was a race car driver, so he was used to the hype and excitement. So you can't just go from that kind of lifestyle to nothing, not doing anything. And when you do, the body starts to shut down in ways you never would imagine. So I wish that I had at an early on took that conversation and made it a little more constructive. And then we would have had to move to an action, which what would have, but a simple thing too is look at all of the things that contributes to officer stress. Look at all the things that leads to public responders, first responder stress. Well, first of all, you're not in a high paying job. Okay, so how much you make? Well, almost never, and I'm careful not to use that word too much. Almost never is enough. So you will always look at, we're going to cut back or you're going to have to go get another job. And that's why you see police officers moonlighting, you know, um, moonlighting, and then as they say, double dipping. You're working over here, and then you rush over to your daughter's recital or her cheerleading competition. You run to your son's softball game, or even to graduation from. So you're running from one thing to another, and you're keeping all these things. But at the same time, you got a high stress job where you're serving and protecting the public. You're going against elements that you got to be on your P's and Q's. So in the midst of all that, you're not eating right. So it was not just enough for you to sit in a class and talk about nutrition, but how about tell me how to
Mhm.
eat right with my hectic schedule? Tell me how hydrating my body was very important, how getting the right amount of sleep, no matter how much you feel like you got to get out and grind, was important. We didn't have those conversations. We was living it, but we weren't having those constructive conversations. So I regret that, because then I wouldn't have had to take the advice and say, wait till you get to this level. I mean, because I was one of those supervisors that if one of my employees was not performing well, or they seemed like they're a little slow in what their normal reaction would be, I said, man, did you work last night? Okay, look, I tell you what, we're going to get you home early. Go home and go to bed. Get you a good night's sleep. I'm going to start these days off getting you home early, get some rest, and come back fresh for the next shift. Because you work with those folks day in and day out, and you know when they're burning at both ends. You
Mhm.
can see the meltdown. But I mean, when you've always been there, oh yeah, man, I had to work a double, I had to do this, I had to do that. Okay, it becomes something that we just take it as our normal, but it's not normal. It's tearing down your body. So being a supervisor and say, hey, go home, or you're not feeling well, go home. You're taking care of your employees. And that's something that a lot of time rising leaders like to pride themselves for doing. But are you really taking care of them? And looking back, I wish we had talked about finances. You know, finances, being in financial trouble can trigger a lot of things in your life that can cause you to stress beyond what the job stress gives you. Not having enough to provide the type housing you need for yourself or your family, not having enough to buy the necessities, getting transportation, having transportation to and from work. We weren't always in take-home cars. So you almost had to have two cars, or one of you or your spouse was going to be without transportation. Those are things that you stress and agonize over. And then distance, being in close proximity of work where it's not a long commute, especially if you only have one car. So there were a lot of things looking back that officers, young, averaging 21, 22 years old, or they've been in the military, they were a little more disciplined. But, young officers, male and female, coming into the profession, you can easily get up to your eyeballs in debt. You can easily get overextended to the point where now you're trying to get married, start a life with a spouse, and you're already, overwhelmed. You're already living above your means. Those are things we needed as young officers. And those are the things now that there are people plugging in and sitting down and have a conversation, having mentors. We let tons of experience walk out the door every year in retirements and never look for a way to engage these hundreds and sometimes thousands of years of wisdom and knowledge to pour back into your younger generation. And they need it because they need to know the why. Why do we need to take better care of ourselves? Because you want to function at your best when you're at work. Your officer safety depends on how well you take care of yourself, how healthy you are when you show up for work each and every time. You got to make split decisions that courts and legal environment is going to spend days, months dissecting what should you have done. You're going to have to train more effectively. So you got to be healthy to
Mm,
do all that. And whereas we train relentlessly, but there were things on the other end that was still taken away from us. And so looking back, if I could have gotten engaged in these conversations along the way versus waiting till I got to the top and then have that conversation. And I don't think it was an intentional thing, but people mean well, but intentions don't get you anything. You have to be proactive and you have to be committed that there's some things that just have to be. And I'm happy today that it's a more common conversation when you say, well, I want to be there for my officers. What do you mean by that?
mm,
And there are people both in law enforcement and in the community that are intelligent enough and conscious enough to call you out on it. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by wellness? You
mm.
know, if you're working officers, to the bone and there's nothing to help out on the end, what are you doing? Or what are you not doing? So throughout my career, being proactive, taking steps, I wish I could have done that at a much lower, because your peer group, you can affect only your immediate intimate circles. But when those circles grow bigger, then you have a bigger impact. And
Mhm.
of course, when you get to the top, you lead by example. You set the tone. This is what we're going to do, and you'd be surprised how many people like that and they're going to buy in
Yeah.
and they're going to follow you as a leader.
Yeah. Wow. Again, there's like a lot I want to like talk about in this and dissect it, but
That's
I heard someone, these are not my words, but
uh,
it was a really interesting thing to think about. I had someone say, what good is a drone program if you don't have a pilot? If you don't have, someone who can pilot the drone? And it was this
yeah,
idea that wellness is the foundation and the core to all of it.
mhm,
If you don't have well officers, if you have people who are leaving this profession entirely, or who are out on injury, out on mental health claims, they're not there. What is the good of anything else, right? Like you have to start there at that foundation. And so one of the things that you said a few times that I wanted to bring up is how. Because I think that people want to be well. I think people
oh
truly
yeah,
like they want their health, whether that's financial health, mental, physical. We all want to feel good. I don't know anyone who has stepped out the door that says, yeah, I just really don't want to feel good mentally, physically. Like, I want to be broke. I want to be, there's no one who
Right.
walks out who says that. I think we all want our health. I think the question, and I, and I think there's always going to be the three steps, the why, the what, the how, right? And so you mentioned the why. Why is it important for these things to happen? Why is it important for you for these things to happen? I can talk all day long about the why, but you also have to be able to identify the why within yourself. Why is it important for you as an individual to be well? Is that your family? Is that your career? What is your why in this whole thing? And then the what, what are the steps that we can take to get there? What are the resources that are available out there? And then how? And you said this a couple times. And I think this is really important because I was in a briefing recently and I was kind of a fly on the wall. There was a financial advisor who was giving a presentation to, a roll call. And there was someone in the room who shared, they were like, I don't know how to invest my money. I don't know how to budget and to save. How do we do this? And he was like, I chat GPT'd, I'm trying to use AI to figure out how I do this. And so if we can empower people, if we can pose the question of why, and we can talk about the importance, but you can also identify the importance within yourself. And then we can educate on what are those resources out there that can help you. And then how do we do this? And I think that the follow-up to this is how can we do these things consistently? It is not a one-time conversation. It is not
Right.
a one-time presentation, where one time a financial advisor gives you a presentation and then that's it. There has to be follow-up. So, how can we do these things consistently over time? And that consistency is going to have long-term benefit.
Right. Well, and what that does is follow up is very important. Uh, but awareness is how you follow up. You
Mm,
know, you don't just feed your children and lay them down and they say, okay, they're going to grow on their own. You follow up to make sure that the food you're giving them is beneficial to them. Some children have allergies, food allergies early on, so you're mindful. So it requires you to be very cognizant of number one, what results look like, what our expectations are in terms of actions. When I mentioned about, suggesting that officer go home. So now I'm going to be looking when the officer comes back. Okay, man, you look like you got some rest when you went home. Or did you just go pawn that time off and found something else to do and now you're still drained? So a friend, a true friend is going to do the hard line. They're going to have a hard conversation with you. Look, you're burning at both ends. You're killing yourself. Everybody's not in your inner circle, but there has to be a genuine care for each other,
mm,
even in the inner circle. If your spouse says, you need to take some time off, I think you're really wearing yourself down. You got to have that voice that's close to you to say that. And that's why, even with leadership, you have to have a real, genuine relationship with the folks following you so that they can give you feedback. Are you open to feedback?
mm,
When an officer says, "Hey, this is getting next to me. I need some time off." Is there a place where we can say, "Hey, can I raise my hand and say, look, man, I need a couple of days off." You know,
yeah.
when I came in there with built-in rest days in your 30-day work month. So sometimes we need to go back. Should there be a rest day that you got to take? It's mandatory. I know everything equates into dollars, and we're under the crunch to do more with less, but times are changing, and the more we invest less in human capital, the more we become reliant on computerized applications. And those things don't cover everything. They're not all inclusive. And when there are questions that are not going to be answered right away. And you're going to go back to human capital. And if you have not invested
Mm,
in the wellness of human capital, it's going to fail you. So if you haven't invested in your own health, And that's one of the things I can say I learned the hard way. I did better as I went along, but man, I had to hit rock bottom on some things for it to really resonate. So now I talk to younger officers, I talk to younger men and women in the community, and I talk about the seriousness of their health, you know, and I don't care how much older I am than they are. I tell them if you want to make a good investment, invest now in the quality of your health. Know how well you are now. Even look to see what kind of, forecast and determine what kind of health issues you may have based on your family members' health. What are some of the environments you're working in? Officers, first responders work in some of the most hazardous environments. Look at the firemen. Nowadays, they're trying to figure out who's been exposed to a fire retardant that now is causing cancer. What about police officers? We go into houses infested with funguses and all kinds of things. Officers develop lung problems. We respond to hurricanes, floodings that bring up tons of germs and bacteria into the environment, and we're out there handling it most of the time with our bare hands. So we don't know what we've been pre-exposed to. So you owe it to yourself to be as healthy about in your body as you can, and know some things about your health. Know your numbers, because there in the state of Florida, there's a heart bill that covers any kind of heart or blood related disease that can be brought upon you just by the hazards of the job. You know, why did they put approve that? Because the record numbers are horrendous
Mm.
of officers, men and women that have died because this developed during the course of their carrying out their duties day in and day out. And they could have lived longer if it had been recognized, appropriately responded to. So I say, it's important for us to move this conversation and grab a hold to a lot of the wisdom that's retiring out of law enforcement. And sometimes you may have to go back and get them as consultants. So I wasn't able to implement this program, but there was a young man named Pat Burns who was a training officer when I retired, and he took up this mantle, and he goes out now and he does workshops. He attends seminars, and he bring that information back. They did a financial literacy workshop because, man, if you're driven to make more money because you don't have enough, you're going to pawn off your good health. You're going to pawn off your time off to make those extra dollars. I mean, I did it, but I'm not sitting there saying that's the way you should do it. With professional athletes, a lot of them go through a financial literacy curriculum before they even get into the profession, but it gives them a chance to make more informed decisions about their finances. We should be doing the same thing about health and wealth. It's not enough to have a mandatory physical agility test you got to pass every year, but it's also good to know what were your numbers coming in the front door.
Mm.
Were
Yeah.
you recruited understanding the demands this profession is going to have on your health? And are you ready for that? Because, your spouses and your children, your loved ones are going to stress out over you, which is going to cause more stress for you when you care for them just equally. So why not manage that by being healthy, mind, body, and spirit, mentally, physically, and even productive wise? So it goes back to what you're here about. It's about wellness, and it's about a mindset that has to be embraced early on, and it has to be converse with people close to you and get out into bigger circles so that now we're yielding results, and then be willing to call out those situations where a good wellness program could have prevented this.
Yeah.
When you see people committing suicide, because you see some stuff that even when it comes out in the news, you see something that there's a filtered version of it. It's nothing worse than watching someone lose their life in a fire, in a tragic accident, in a shootout. Those are things that officers and first responders face every single day. And when they see it, they don't necessarily come over to you and say, "Hey, I don't feel well." Some people handle it well. Some people, 3, 4 months, they're acting as if nothing ever happened. But some people, they're acting like nothing ever happened, but it's it's that little snippet video that's playing back in their mind. Post-trauma stress, just like people in the war, they live it. So now it becomes a lens of how they focus and function with other people. Sometimes they become overprotective with their own children and loved ones.
Yeah.
And it's out of a genuine concern, but it's because they're not mentally as well as they think they are. So
Yeah.
it has to become more of a proactive step and not just a casual conversation, not just a political um, cliche that you can gain votes. You got to hold somebody that says that. You got to hold them accountable for that.
Yeah. Well,
Everybody in the world last election said they were pro law enforcement. We love our law enforcement. But now let's pull a report card up. Let's go to our local agencies. How well are they supported?
yeah.
Campus policing has become even more stressful than it ever has been. So how well are the campus police supported? You know, they have a very, very complex job. It's not the same as on the streets,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I think that we can take a look at all of the external stress, how
Hmm.
that's going to impact each person. And it's going to impact each person differently. You said this,
Yeah,
some people
yes,
are going
yeah.
to respond to it different. Some are going to be more affected than others in certain situations. And I think a few things that you said are important. One is, what are the steps? I think when you say steps, I think action,
Yeah,
right? What are the steps? Understanding that when something impacts you, and you need to take those steps, that it's strength, not weakness. It
right.
takes courage to walk the path. But also, I really liked what you said before, is because I think that we all fall into this, right? Like, we're in the grind, we're in the
Hmm.
day to day, right? We're
Hmm.
we're in the trenches. And sometimes we don't have those moments of self-assessment. We're
Right.
so focused on the mission, we're so focused on taking care of everybody else that we forget to take that, inward look of like, am I okay? Have I gained weight? Am I losing my hair? Is it, what are the things that are happening, internally? And
Hmm.
so to your point, having a circle around you, and I heard this a long time ago, and I've always kind of stuck with this. I don't know if it's still true or not, but I it sounds real to me. They said that you are influenced by the five closest people to you, and so
Yes.
choose that circle wisely, right? And so, do you have people in your circle that are in your corner, that want you to win, that are paying attention to you when you're not paying attention to yourself? And what you said that I think is so important, are you open to feedback from those people? I am I'm a really firm believer that you should take advice from people who want you to win, and tune out the advice from people who want you to lose, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and also take advice from experts, take advice from the people who you want to emulate. But I'm really guilty of this, and I have to really actively work on this. And someone told me that when someone comes to you and they point something out, and obviously there's a way to do this. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
like, attack somebody,
Yeah.
and but when it's, and again, the environment has to be right. Is it someone who's in your corner? Is it someone who you value their opinion? Is it someone who cares about you? If those things are true, are you able to take a moment to understand that if someone comes to you and they say, "Hey, I'm noticing these things," or "Hey, I think you need to take a day off," or "Hey, I think that maybe you need to, look for some resources for yourself," that is an act of love.
Yeah.
And I think when I realized that when people are coming to me and they're asking me questions, "Are you okay?" or "Hey, I think you need to take time for yourself," it is not an act of meanness, it's an act of kindness, it's an act of
Right.
love. They actually care about you. If someone's, doesn't care about you, they're not going to say anything to you about it. And so, are we willing to to take that feedback to heart? And are we willing to have that self-assessment within ourselves, to take those steps, to take those actions? And I think that so often we rely on other people to to I hear this a lot, right? It's like we want to place the blame on other people, or we want to wait for other people to provide these things for us. And yes, I do think that organizations are doing a much better job at providing things like financial literacy workshops, nutrition, all the stuff that's happening right now. But if your agency isn't doing those things and you want something above and beyond, then it's your responsibility to take that action and to take it
Yeah,
upon yourself to take care of you. Because at the end
right.
of the day, you got to take care of you. You can't, rely on other people to do it for you. So I really like that question. And I think it's an important question to ask is, are you open to feedback and are you willing to take the steps that are necessary to take care of you? Uh,
Yeah,
so thank you for that. One of the
yeah.
other things that you said, and I know we're kind of butting up on time. Time flies here, but
I saw that.
I thought it was really interesting because one of the things I think we haven't cracked yet is retirees and how do we continue to support and engage retirees. And I've talked to a lot of people who are retired. I've talked to people who are afraid of retiring. And, it's this idea that, one day they're going to have a little party for you and then the door is going to lock and your badge isn't going to work anymore and that's it, right? And so I like that you said, hey, there is a whole wealth of knowledge and experience with these individuals who are retiring from your agency. How can you dip into that? How can you utilize retirees as a resource? I'm sure, and maybe you can speak to it because I know, you're retired and you've been through it, but I would imagine that there are a lot of retirees out there that would love to come back and do a presentation or a workshop and
Yeah,
talk about some of this stuff. People who, are really experienced with certain topics, or, are maybe even coming in and just talking about the I wish, and,
yeah.
and trying to motivate people to prioritize. I'm curious to see like if there would be an opportunity for agencies to, you know, utilize retirees to their advantage in a way, use them as a resource. And I would imagine that that would fulfill the people who have retired too, because they feel like they still have a connection to the agency and they still, have purpose within the organization.
Yeah, I think that it definitely would. I try to stay in touch with the agency, the Pensacola Police Department that I work with. I try to make sure I maintain a good communicating relationship with each chief that comes and sits in that office. Um, and I try to offer if they think there's anything I can do that might help the force. I like to offer that. Um, and I think a lot of times, you know, that position of chief can get so busy that you you know you forget about it. But I think futuristically it's going to be important because as things are changing, there are a lot of cultural things that are changing, but still there are links back to old cultural ways. And so you got a newer generation of officers that are not necessarily uh, culturally competent in that regard. And that's not to say anything negative. There's only so much you can teach in a classroom,
Yeah.
you know. So while you may be dealing with the today and to now trends, there are a lot of cultural things that can be determinants as to whether you get the support you need from the general population or whether you're just getting those that are follow trends. Well, everybody's not following trends, and then sometimes people have a conversation with you right now, but they will not commit to taking any actions or being involved or follow up. So I think it's gonna be a greater demand. It was always a demand to me to get mentors back into your agency that were great investigators, that were great crime scene technicians that were great administrators understood when we didn't have a computer, how it all started. Because when your system shut down, you got to have a way to continue to operate. And if you don't know how it can be done and still deliver the data that's needed that can be put in a system later on, then you're like at a standstill. It's a complicated problem. But if you got people who's been there and watched the evolution of this whole process, you can glean from them, and one day be able to use it because you don't have what you're used to having. And that's the thing about, health and wellness doesn't have to require you to spend a whole lot of money because now he said, well, I can't afford that. But it's just like breathing exercises. 20-second breathing exercises can change how your body is responding to a stressful situation, or just getting up and changing your focus from one thing to something that's totally different can allow your brain to cool off and reset and
Yeah.
go back and re-engage. So there are things that organizations can provide in terms of consultancy and then volunteers. And sometimes you may have to pay somebody who's very good at what they do and their time is demanding. Don't be reluctant to pay for it if you really need it. But it goes back to something you said. We all had to struggle. I told you I struggled with committing myself to a better health plan for me. And it took some catalyst events to happen for me to be totally committed. But I'm at the weight now that I wanted to be about 25 years ago. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, you know?
Yeah.
So when you talk about regret, there's a pool of regret that we all find ourselves in. I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. But learn from it and try to help somebody else not go down that same pathway. And that's what, giving back as a retiree is all about. That's what staying engaged in community conversations, staying in forums like you're in right now is very important because it's your way of still leading by example without actually being in an official role. And if I am able to go back in official role, I can pick up where I need to. I'm learning how to be scalable, learning how to be even more productive even at a less physical capabilities. You got to learn how to scale and still be relevant and productive in the arena that you are. And that's where law enforcement is challenged with now. That's where even the professionals in our community health, they can't just stay in those same traditional silos. You got to go out. You got to be in forums like this. You got to break it down where they can pick it up later on when they get off from work and still hear all of it
Mm.
because it's all important. And so I appreciate what you're doing because it helps get the message out there. And I hope that it challenges those that listen to your podcast to not just hear and agree with it, but go do something about it because your life depends on it. Your loved ones will love to know that you're better taking care of yourself. Your mom, your dad, your grandparents, they're all concerned, but you don't want them dying because they just stressed out over you're not taking care of yourself and everybody knows it. Your best friends, they want you around for a long time.
Yeah.
Develop plenty of war stories you can laugh about, but you got to be healthy to be able to laugh about it, you know.
Yeah.
And even relationships, whether you're married or not, you want every relationship in to be a healthy one and not one that's toxic that a person got to decide, do I want to stay with this person or not? You know. So
Yeah.
it affects every aspect of life that we either directly or indirectly come in contact with.
Yeah, 100%. And one, I think that the the concept of having a mentorship program that involves retirees is really interesting. I've never heard this before. Maybe it's something that anyone who's listening could toss around. I think it's really kind of an interesting concept. I think it's really cool. And two, I think what you just said goes back to this idea that wellness is the core to everything.
Yes.
And that has to be the top priority. I truly believe that. I think there would be few people that could argue with that, in order for you to have a long and successful career, long and successful life, you have to be well. And so, my final question for you, and I know you talked about kind of the pool of regret and the lessons learned and the things that um, maybe you wish you would have known, but what words of wisdom would you share with individuals who are earlier in their career? You know, the younger men and women who are entering into this profession. What words of wisdom would you share with them? You know, maybe something that you wish you would have known, or something that you learned along the way.
Well, one of the things I learned is that there are some problems in first responders that starts early on, and uh, we don't pick up on the warning signals. So pay attention to your health. Value your health. Your health is better than your pay. You can have a pay that's optimum and people would die for, but if you're not healthy, you're going to spend that money on things that trying to be healthy. I look at professional athletes. Um, the average professional athlete career is about 4.5 to 6 years, maybe. And then they start to, and they retire. But even if they were star athletes, if they didn't take care of their bodies, they're going to spend all of that money on trying to just stay healthy or just to maintain and stay alive. Same thing with officers. You're going to pay it one way or the other. The money I would normally spend on co-payments because I got health problems, I'm spending it on eating better, taking care of my body, taking vacations, doing things I like, learning more about the things I need to do, even long term, to live longer and healthier. So I say, and I tell them, I wished I had started early. I wish I had started like 30 years ago. And I said, don't you wait 30 years later and say the same thing, because young people are being diagnosed with cancer, severe cancer cases, men and women, young people being diagnosed with diabetes. The quality of foods that we're putting in our bodies now is not like it used to be. So you could be taking something and it's purely innocent and it's going to cause you cancer 5, 10 years down the road. So take an interest in what you're putting in your body. Take an interest in how you treat your body. And more importantly, know your own body.
Mm, love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your
Sure.
time. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience and your wisdom. Thank you very much. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome. I wish you well, and I hope that everybody that see this podcast are blessed by it.
Thank you.